I think you keep it, but where's Dennis? Dennis gonna stay out there, Trent? Dennis gonna stay out there? Dennis is gonna stay out there? Okay, okay. I tell you what, do this here, if you would, Chris. Mr. Mayor, you wanna stand a little closer to the podium? Here? Okay, okay. You got everybody? Okay. I think you keep it, but where's Dennis? Dennis gonna stay out there, Trent? Dennis gonna stay out there? Dennis is gonna stay out there? Okay, okay. I tell you what, do this here, if you would, Chris. Mr. Mayor, you wanna stand a little closer to the podium? Here? Okay, okay. You got everybody? Okay. If everyone's ready, we will begin. Good morning, I'm Attorney Ben Crump, along with a team of great lawyers, including Attorney Trent Copeland, Attorney Natalie Jackson, Attorney Nabiha Shear, Attorney Linda Freeman, Attorney Suzanne Bish, and especially Attorney Dennis Ellis, who is the intern lead counsel in this class action lawsuit against Wells Fargo. We have the distinct honor of representing potentially 750,000 people of color across America who feel that they have been treated unfairly, discriminatorily, bias in their interactions with Wells Fargo, one of the largest banks in the United States of America. Present with us today are our plaintiffs, some of the named plaintiffs. We have Dr. Gia Gray, who you will hear from. You have Mr. Aaron Braxton, who you will hear from. You have Mr. Chris Williams, who you will hear from. I would be remiss if I didn't take just a moment to tell you about a hero of ours. To many Californians, but to people all across America, a great leader who always speaks truth to power and who never forgets the least of these. You all know him. He was the longest serving Speaker of the House of the state of California, and he's the former mayor of this great city of San Francisco. He is none other than the icon, the legendary Mayor Willie Brown, and we applaud his presence here with us today. And I'm going to address you, and then before my great co-counsel, Attorney Trent Copeland, address you, we think it appropriate that you hear from Mayor Brown. And then you will hear from the plaintiffs who are amongst us today, and then we will take your questions in that order. So I begin very straightforward. As was announced yesterday, Wells Fargo entered into a $1 billion class action settlement with shareholders for allegations of unethical practices in the past. In addition, Attorney Nabi Hashir, they entered into a $3.7 billion settlement with federal regulators because they took advantage of their customers' auto loans, mortgages, and bank accounts. Now that they have entered into settlements with their wealthy shareholders, Mayor Brown, and the federal regulators, Attorney Ellis, I declare it is long past time for Wells Fargo to enter into a resolution with the people who are most affected by their unethical practices. And that is the marginalized minorities who were denied economic parity with white citizens and the minority customers of Wells Fargo who still every month have to pay high interest mortgage payments. That's what this is about. This is about equality and fairness to all your customers, Wells Fargo. It is not lost on us that today marks the 69th anniversary of the landmark decision in Brown versus Board of Education, which was a seminal case in civil rights in the United States of America. Today, we're fighting the 21st century battle in civil rights, which is one of economic justice. And I believe just like Brown versus the Board of Education was the seminal civil rights case in the 20th century, we believe that this case for the bias and discriminatory actions of this big bank, this bank too big to fail, is a seminal case in the 21st century battle for civil rights. Attorney Jackson, as we all learned in law school, the basic premise of the decision in the Brown versus of Education that was argued by my personal hero, Thurgood Marshall, was that separate but equal was inherently unconstitutional. Where Attorney Copeland and I declare that discrimination in banking against black and brown people is inherently un-American. Wells Fargo, I hope you make a note of that. Homeownership is the heart of the American dream, and Wells Fargo has pushed that dream out of reach for thousands of black and brown Americans with their blatant discrimination loan practices. Just as we have cried out against policing practices that kill black people and brown people, so do we denounce Wells Fargo racially motivated banking practices that kill black and brown opportunity. We all know that the pandemic took a disproportionate toll on black Americans. But if Wells Fargo had just extended the same opportunities to black customers as they did to white customers, we could have enjoyed unprecedented progress in closing the home ownership gap among black Americans, building black wealth and family stability, driving investment opportunities in black neighborhoods, and increasing intergenerational wealth for black families. Instead, Wells Fargo systematically denied black Americans and other minorities mortgages, charged them higher interest rates, refused to invest in their business practices and opportunities, and denied black Americans the benefits the federal government intended for all Americans to weather during the pandemic. You're going to hear in just a few minutes from Attorney Copeland talking about these were historic lows in the interest rate. I mean, this was an opportunity for people who was in these adjustable mortgages to be able to capture an opportunity where their mortgages would have been less than 2%. And they will never get this opportunity again in the foreseeable future. Many commentators who have observed these factors have said this was the greatest loss of opportunity for wealth for black Americans in modern U.S. history. Finally, the racist and discriminatory practices of Wells Fargo led to emotional distress and loss of wealth. Our plaintiffs were in positions to secure these historic low interest rates, but they were unlawfully discriminated against because of the color of their skin. We won't let this happen anymore. Banks cannot treat black people and brown people like second-class citizens. Not on our watch. We're standing on your shoulders, Mayor Brown and others who will always speak truth to power, even if they tell us it's unpopular, even if they tell us it's controversial, even if our knees are shaking and our palms are sweaty and our hearts are racing. We will continue to speak truth to power, giving a voice to the voiceless, fighting for those who are marginalized, disenfranchised, and victimized, not only by government institutions, but by these great corporate titans, where we're here to fight for the Davids against the Wells Fargo Goliath. And we are not afraid to take on this battle. And we know, Attorney Ellis, that some of our clients feel afraid that they may be retaliated against. But I want to believe in the new leadership at Wells Fargo, the new executives who say that they're going to do better going forward in the future. Well, I want you to know, to the current CEO, the current COO, and the current executive leadership of Wells Fargo, we want to believe in you. But just like I was taught by my grandmother from my Bible studies, even though you say you're going to do better in the future, you still must atone for your past sins that black people and brown people and minorities in America are still suffering from. You did right with your shareholders for $1 billion. You did right by the federal regulators to the tune of $3.7 billion. It is long past time for you to finally do right by the people who were most affected by your unethical practices. And now you will hear from a man who always speaks truth to power and who we are truly honored, said that even though he has served the public greatly, that to help those without a voice, he will again lend his voice and his influence. Please acknowledge the great former mayor of San Francisco, Mayor Willie Brown.
It was several months ago when Dennis Ellis called me to alert me and inform me about the lawsuit against Wells Fargo. Initially, I, of course, was as optimistic as I was when I first got to California. I left the world of discrimination that was part of a way of life in Mineola, Texas. And I came here to San Francisco, anticipating that it was all behind me. But to my great surprise, it wasn't. Because some of you, probably not many of you, are old enough to know, but the first demonstration on the issue of housing in San Francisco, I conducted. That was more than 6 decades ago. And you would think that things would have been learned by one of the premier institutions in San Francisco.
Yes, sir.
And when the lawyers walked me through the damage that had been done and the factual support for that, I said, count me in. As was the case with Dr. King, just before his death, he said, yes, the civil rights struggle is one involving education, it's one involving employment, but the one that will make the institutional difference forever, if it is appropriately and effectively addressed and administered to, is the one that has to do with the question of wealth and ownership.
Yes. Yes.
As indicated by Mr. Crump, this case will rise to the same level of Brown versus the Board of Education and some of the other things that have been done in other locations.
Yes, sir.
I'm pleased that this one is going to be done right here in San Francisco, because going forward, it will be the kind of leadership when this decision is made. It will be the kind of leadership that may very well change the entire nation. And I'm very pleased to be a part of and the spokesperson for, and to be associated with such incredible talent, responding to the victims in the most dramatic way. And interestingly enough, these are not people who are broke. These are people who've earned money, and they have worked hard to earn money. They wanted quality home ownership. But as they unfolded, even though they qualified, they didn't qualify for legitimate consideration on their loans. Yes, they could make a loan, but it'll cost them a hell of a lot more than their neighbor. And believe me, it was not only, and I suspect that you'll hear more about this, it was not only just African Americans.
No.
It was Latinos and
Uh-huh.
Asians. All three were below where white folk received attention and consideration and loans on a far more favorable basis. And these are people who had qualified under the most strict circumstance and evaluations for qualifications, and had demonstrated their ability to continuously pay. This was the difference between about a 7% interest rate and a 2% interest rate. 2 for whites, 7 for blacks. That's obviously why King went to Memphis with those workers that he was going to give credence and help to. He understood, just as if he was alive today, he would be here doing exactly what I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for continuing to lead us to a better America. At this time, we're going to hear from a great attorney who I'm so proud to call my co-counsel. He's with the firm Ellis, George, Ciparone, and with all the other talented, great lawyers who are on the forefront. This brother has worked hard day and night to make sure that these people who Wells Fargo thought were going to be marginalized would be marginalized no more. And that is none other than attorney Trent Copeland from Los Angeles, California.
Thank you. We are so honored to be here standing on the shoulders of giants like Mayor Willie Brown, civil rights icon Ben Crump. But we're here on the steps of the federal courthouse, not just on these steps as visitors, but people here advocating for the plaintiffs and the people, the 750,000 other putative plaintiffs. We're here advocating on their behalf and asking for justice. And so while we stand on these steps of this courthouse, we are truly at the intersection, at the crossroad of racial justice, equity, and inclusion as it relates to home ownership. You don't have to look far to understand how important it is to have generational wealth within your family, and that begins with the opportunity to buy your own home, to refinance your own home. And those opportunities to each of our plaintiffs here were lost as a result of the wrongful conduct and behavior of Wells Fargo. So we ask that each of you stand with us, fight with us as we address these systemic concerns. And so our view is that we would ask and we will urge Wells Fargo to address and to face the egregious asymmetry between, on the one hand, accepting our depositors' money, on the one hand, holding their hands out to accept their deposits, and while on the other, pushing back, not giving them the opportunities of home equity. These are the inconsistencies that we will draw on. These are the patterns of behavior that this bank, a bad actor, an actor who we know, and don't just listen to us. Look at the data. Look at all of the evidence. Look at the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. Look at all of the evidence that's before them. Look at the bad practices of predatory lending in 2012. Just across the bay, look at what the Oakland City Attorney's Office did. They sued them for discrimination. Yesterday, they settled for $1 billion. These are the practices and the behaviors of a bad actor. And so we ask you, as we stand with you, as you stand with us, as we stand with these brave, courageous plaintiffs, that Wells Fargo come to the table, do the right thing.
Yeah. Because of the color of their skin, they were still denied the opportunities that their white brothers and sisters were denied. And as attorney Linda Freeman and I have talked long and hard, Christopher Williams could not have done more things right to be given dignity and equality by Wells Fargo. But yet, he too were denied. And so the first plaintiff you'll hear from is going to be Mr. Christopher Williams.
Thank you, Christopher. Good afternoon. I stand before you with 2 decades of experience in the financial services industry. I worked in the retail banking industry, I worked in consumer finance. I worked in the mortgage department. I worked as a business banker, and I worked as a private banker where I managed a portfolio of the affluent client base. My name is Christopher Williams. I, too, was a Wells Fargo bank customer. I had a relationship with Wells Fargo on the deposit side as well as Wells Fargo advisors on their brokerage side. I wanted to access the equity in my home. I applied for a home equity line of credit. I had strong employment, good income, a low debt to income ratio, and a strong equity position in my home. All of the factors that I thought made me a well-qualified borrower. I did not consider one factor. I did not consider the color of my skin nor my race when I thought about my qualifications. I applied for that home equity line of credit with Wells Fargo, and they approved it. When we got to the point of pricing, Wells Fargo told me that my rate was going to be prime plus 3 points. My credit score when I applied was 797. Wells Fargo told me my score was 696. I asked them, what is that discrepancy? They were not able to provide me with any reason for the discrepancy in that score, 101 points. So when I asked my processor, I used to work in the business. I know that when I did these lines of credits for well-qualified borrowers, we did them at prime or prime minus something. Do you no longer offer that? The processor said, yes, we do. And I said, then you're telling me that that 100-point discrepancy in my score is costing me 3 points on this mortgage, on this line of credit. And they said, well, yes, we are. Then you have to provide me with the reason for this discrepancy. I declined to do that loan with Wells Fargo. I went across the street to one of their competitors. Same application, same income, same credit score. That lender approved my line of credit for prime minus a quarter. I am with that lender today. What does the impact of that disparate treatment have on people who look like me, black and brown people, by Wells Fargo? Because I know the industry, because of my experience in the industry, I was aware of the pricing that I should have received. For those that were not aware, how many of those loans and lines of credits are on Wells Fargo books right now at that discriminatory pricing? Prime plus 3. There are a lot of places that you can go before you get to 3. Prime plus a quarter, prime plus 1. They go in quarter increments. They went straight to prime plus 3. I declined the loan, the approval from Wells Fargo. I told them that I felt it was discriminatory in their practices. They said they were launching an investigation. They came back to me and told me that they did nothing wrong. There were other, I'll put it in air quotes, they said there were other factors that they considered when approving loans. I asked what those other factors were. They were never able to approve it. I don't mind if you change the rules of the game. Just let me know what those rules are so that I can play them to my advantage. Wells Fargo has a history of discriminatory practices, and I thank you, Ben Crump. I thank all of the attorneys that are here to represent us who are fighting for economic justice for black and brown people. That's my story with Wells Fargo.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mr. Christopher Williams. Next, and I think about what Attorney Copeland was saying about these interest rates. And I remember Attorney Freeman and Attorney Suzanne Bish talking about it's a subprime interest rate that they're giving to well-qualified black applicants. I mean, does this look like a man who should be paying subprime when he's done everything right? What would they have given to a white customer with his sterling credentials? That is the fight, Attorney Ellis. That is the fight. Next, you're about to hear from a young man who suffered similar injustices in the face of Wells Fargo, And I know Attorney Ellis has talked to me about the long, arduous journey that you had dealing with Wells Fargo. And, you know, I think there are things when we say we are the best, the brightest, most qualified. What else can we do, Wells Fargo, for you to treat us with dignity and respect? You're going to hear from Mr. Aaron Braxton, who is a named plaintiff on the complaint against Wells Fargo. Aaron has a story very similar to Mr. Williams, but all of them are different in a certain way. Please pay attention. Mr. Aaron Braxton.
So first let me say thank you for being here. I love the skin that I'm in. But let me just say that it's tough being an African American in this country. Wow. We're constantly code shifting, and that takes a toll on our psyche. When we're followed in a store, we have to make a conscious decision in regards to whether they're following us because of our color or do they follow everyone. When a police car pulls behind us, many of us go through a checklist. Are we being racially profiled, or did the officer just want to change lanes? When attempting to refinance our homes, homes that are supposed to represent the American dream, and we're asked to send documents after documents over and over and over again. Are they doing this to everybody? Or are they only doing this to black folks? Break it down, Aaron, break it down. No matter our socioeconomic status, we code shift daily, and it takes a toll on our mental health. Wells Fargo for centuries has had a history of raking in billions of dollars off the blatant discriminatory practices against African Americans. The interesting thing is they've already calculated their risk. They know that the amount of money they've paid in compensatory damages is crumbs compared to the amount of money they've made off of our backs. So they continue to do it because to them, discrimination is big business. And manipulation in isolation is one of their greatest weapons. Wow. The very last thing that I said to Jose at Wells Fargo after giving me the runaround for a year and a half, when all I wanted to do was change my interest rate from 6% to as close to 1% as possible. I didn't want to take $2 out of my home, a home that was worth over $700,000, and all I owed was less than $150,000 on it. I just wanted the rate to change. No money out. The last thing I said to him was, "You messed with the wrong one." I was raised by a strong mom who taught me that I stand on the shoulder of giants. I told him, I am going to sue you. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I am going to sue you because I know I'm not the only one. I know you're doing this to other people. It's time that we collectively say enough is enough. It's time we send Wells Fargo a message that we, as a nation of compassionate, hardworking individuals with integrity and honor, will no longer stand for these blatant, discriminatory, and racist practices. That when you come for one of us, You come for all of us. And we will no longer stand for it. I want to thank Mr. Ellis. I want to thank Mr. Crump. I want to thank former Mayor Willie Brown and all of their team for their courageous effort and fighting this fight with us. And I want to thank you guys all for coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Braxton. Thank you very much. And it is emotional. Fighting racism and discrimination is emotional. I mean, I know a lot of people who don't have to deal with it can't fathom it, but it's hard every day being told that you're inferior, that you don't get equal opportunity at the American dream. Did y'all hear the agony in Mr. Braxton's voice? You multiply that by 700,000, because that's what we're fighting. The final person you're going to hear, Attorney Terry Wallace, she's from your neck of the woods. She's from around here in Northern California. And you heard Mr. Williams from Atlanta. I mean, it's rampant all across America that they are engaging in this systematic racism and discrimination when it comes to refinancing and loans on mortgages. And we know, based on the history, 3.7 billion with a B to federal regulators, 1 billion with a B to the shareholders, and then to the people, zero. No. Mr. Braxton, we ain't gonna let that happen. We ain't gonna let that happen. So the final person you will hear from is a sister who is, as I've often heard from the reading about W.B. Du Bois, Mayor Brown, and the talented 10th. She's the best we got to offer the world. I mean, articulate, educated, resourceful. I mean, she has everything. She's a doctor. But yet, Wells Fargo treated her just like all the rest of the black and brown people. It didn't matter how many credentials she had. And so you're going to hear from a strong sister, Dr. Gia Gray.
Thank you so much, and I just want to thank all of you for being here today. My story is very similar to the other two gentlemen. What I keep hearing from everyone is the talk about the American dream. As a young black woman growing up, a young girl growing up in the inner city of Chicago, my goal was always, my parents raised me to be the best that I could, to do my best, and to try to get that American dream. After my residency, I moved out here, and I was able to afford a home in one of the top cities in Northern California, the top zip codes, wealthy zip codes. And I gained a great job, employment. And I thought to myself, this is American dream. When I had the opportunity to refinance my house, I automatically thought that I would be treated fairly. And I had two properties that I was interested in refinancing. One property was in Chicago, where I was from, and the property that I was living in was my dream property. As I was going through that process, I began to realize at the visceral level that things were going on that I did not feel were fair. The process was occurring during the pandemic. The process began to be prolonged. Every time I achieved a target, the target kept changing and moving. And to me, I felt that something was not right. And I kept getting the runaround about my Chicago property, which was not in an all-white area. Multiple emails back and forth, me voicing frustrations to the Wells Fargo agent that I was dealing with. And I just knew that this process should not take this long. And as I was going through the process, I was excited. Everyone wants to refinance and get a lower rate. but I felt I was being dragged. And I'm so thankful to my attorney, Trent Copeland, for validating my whole entire experience. After learning that other people were also going through what I was going through, I just feel as though now is my time to use my voice to help others. Wells Fargo has to be accountable. Thank you, Benjamin Crump. Thank you to former Mayor Willie Brown. Thank you to Trent Copeland and the Ellis Group. Thank you to all of us, all of you here to listen to our stories. We want action. We want action now.
Action now. Thank you so much, Dr. Gray. Justice delayed won't be justice denied in this instance, because we're going to get justice. Wells Fargo, we're going to get justice. We will take your questions now, if you have any. Let's let Trent and Mayor Brown come up. Okay, let's let Trent and Ms. Brown. Repeat the question. Let's say it a little louder. I will say this, and Attorney Copeland then can give even more detail. We know today is an important day because Wells Fargo is going to have to answer to the lawsuit today. And they're going to have to tell us what is their defense to what Attorney Copeland articulated, this great disparity. And I do know this. They did not file a motion to dismiss. They're answering the lawsuit. That, in many ways, dignifies these clients coming forward, saying that there is merit to their outrage against Wells Fargo. Attorney Copeland?
That's right. They're required to file an answer. They're required to file what's called a responsive pleading. It appears that they'll be making the decision, rather than moving to dismiss this case, they'll be making a decision to answer the case. And so we're looking forward to that answer. That answer will either have to be one of two things: either acknowledging that the data that supports the disparate treatment between African Americans and other minorities is real, or they're going to simply have to say, well, if you apply to for Wells Fargo for a loan, you've got a 47% chance of succeeding in comparison to other larger groups. So we're looking forward to that answer. We're here for the long run. And if this case requires class certification, we'll move for class certification. But we're here for the long run.
Amen. Are there any other questions? If there are none, we will continue to keep you updated. We know that many members of the Congressional Black Caucus is watching this case very closely, as well they should. We again thank former Mayor Willie Brown for his willingness to give his voice so that Mr. Christopher Williams, Mr. Aaron Braxton, and medical doctor, Gia Gray, and the nameless and faceless other black and brown people across America will have a voice. Thank you so much, Mayor Willie Brown. Thank you all. Yes. Well, you know, it's very simple. Somebody blowing the horn telling me they want to hear the answer too. It is very simple, though. I want to believe in the new executives, the new leaders. They're saying all the right things. But again, I go back to my grandmother, Attorney Jackson, who taught me when I was a little boy. Your actions speak so loud, I need not hear your words. We started this press conference off by acknowledging just yesterday they entered into a $1 billion settlement. That's billion with a B, with their wealthy shareholders over untruthful, unethical acts that they did in the past. Before that, months ago, they entered into a 3.7 billion with a B settlement with federal regulators over their unethical practices. What do we want Wells Fargo to do? Is to enter into a resolution with the people who were most affected by their unethical practices. And that is the black and brown citizens across America who had to bear the brunt of the discrimination and bias, who had to bear the brunt of missing out on a historic opportunity in America to reduce, what you said, Mr. Braxton, to try to reduce a 6 or 7% interest rate down to less than 2%. Y'all know how much money that is over a 30-year mortgage? I mean, that's what home ownership is. It's about building wealth, something that black people historically have been unable to do in America for a myriad of reasons. But the reason is clear when it came to 2020, where these black and brown people were denied this historic opportunity to close the gap on home ownership, to close the wealth gap in America, to be able to pass on generational wealth to their children, like our white brothers and sisters. And we are here on this day, the 69th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education, the seminal civil rights case in the 20th century. Now we're fighting the 21st century civil rights struggle. What do we want Wells Fargo to do? To do right by your customers. Do right by your customers, irrespective if the color of their skin is black or brown. We have an opportunity to all be better for this, Wells Fargo. All of us can be better based on your decision going forward. Thank you.